Over the past few seasons of the EdTech Curio Cabinet, we've explored a wide landscape of educational curiosities. We began with the persistence of educational structures that seem remarkably resistant to change, the lecture that continues to endure, the assessment systems that remain deeply familiar even as technology evolves around them, the productive struggle that often sits at the center of meaningful learning. We then explored the accelerating role of technology in education, artificial intelligence, adaptive learning systems, academic integrity, personalized feedback, along with the growing tension between efficiency and the depth of learning environments. In our third season, we widen the lens even further. We examine the educational systems that shape societies themselves. Global approaches to mathematics and engineering education. We looked at trust-based educational cultures, the research universities and innovation ecosystems around them, and the expanding idea of a globally connected classroom. Across all of these conversations, one deeper pattern kept emerging. Education evolves through a continuous dialogue between humans and their tools. And today, that dialogue is entering a remarkable new chapter. For the first time in history, many of the tools surrounding education no longer simply store knowledge. Increasingly, they generate it. They explain, they summarize, they simulate conversation, and they produce images, essays, solutions. And they do so with a fluency that can feel surprisingly human, which raises a whole new set of educational questions. What happens to learning when explanations become instantly available? How do students develop mastery in a world filled with on-demand intelligent assistance? And what role will educators play when machines can increasingly participate in teaching and assessment? And perhaps most importantly, what aspects of learning remain fundamentally human? This season of the EdTech Curio Cabinet explores these questions. We'll examine the evolving relationship between human cognition and intelligent machines. We'll look at the paradoxes emerging around artificial intelligence and education, the promises and the tensions surrounding automation, creativity, and assessment, and the ways educators may shape a future where technology supports human flourishing rather than narrowing it. And as always, each episode will explore 4 curiosities along the way. We'll look at the artifact, a tool, technology, or educational practice shaping the modern landscape. We'll look at the pattern, the historical or cultural forces that help explain why it emerged, and the paradox, the unexpected tension hidden between the surface, and finally a signal, a glimpse into where learning may be heading next. Because the most interesting questions in education rarely concern technology alone. They concern people. They concern how they think. They concern how they grow, and how societies cultivate understanding across generations. So let's open the cabinet once again. Welcome to Season 4, Human Learning in the Age of Intelligent Machines. I'm going to set the scene for a scenario that will be mostly quite familiar to us all. A student sits alone at their desk late at night. Tomorrow morning, they have an exam, more specifically, a calculus exam. Their textbook is open to a page filled with symbols, scratch pads nearby filled with partially erased questions, maybe some crinkled up. And the evening proceeds with various moments of frustration, followed by flashes of understanding and more scribbling. But now this familiar scene begins to diverge, and increasingly another presence joins the table. A conversational artificial intelligence. The student types a question. Can you please explain integration by parts? Within seconds, a response appears. And it's not a simple definition. It's a personalized explanation. Step-by-step reasoning with worked examples, possibly some encouragement, alternative approaches. And the student asks another question, and then another, and the system patiently responds every single time. There's no office hours required, no waiting for email replies, just an immediate explanation. Now, for generations, access to expert guidance was constrained by geography, class sizes, time, and institutional resources. But now, explanation itself has become abundant. And that changes something important about learning. Because throughout the history of education, explanation has held tremendous power. The person who could explain often became the teacher. The book that explained became the curriculum, and the institution that organized these explanations became the university. But today, explanation is becoming automated, which raises a really intriguing educational question. If machines can increasingly explain almost anything, what becomes more important for humans to learn? Welcome to the EdTech Curio Cabinet. I'm Christina, and in each episode we explore the evolving world of education through 4 lenses: the artifact, the educational tool, practice, or technology shaping how people learn; the pattern, the deeper historical forces that explain how we arrived here; the paradox, that tension or contradiction hidden beneath the surface; and then finally the signal, a glimpse into where education may be heading next. In this curio, we explain the rise of machines that explain. Now, one of the most striking characteristics of modern generative artificial intelligence systems is their ability to explain. Large language models can now produce surprisingly coherent explanations across an enormous range of subjects. A student can ask for a simpler explanation from the one that's first received. They can ask for another example, potentially a practice problem, or even feedback on their own reasoning. And that system can respond conversationally in real time. And in many ways, this resembles a long-standing aspiration within educational technology. For decades, researchers explored the idea of intelligent tutoring systems. Educational psychologist Benjamin Bloom famously described what became known as the 2 sigma problem: the observation that students receiving one-on-one tutoring often perform better, dramatically better, than students learning through conventional classroom instruction. The challenge was scale. Human tutoring is very effective. It is also extraordinarily expensive and difficult to provide universally. Educational technologies repeatedly attempted to narrow this gap. They delivered adaptive learning systems, stepwise feedback engines, automated hints, but conversational AI introduces something very different: fluid dialogue. The interaction feels less like navigating software and more like participating in an ongoing conversation. And importantly, these systems reduce friction around asking questions. And we've all experienced or at least observed this. Students often hesitate to ask instructors for clarification. Some worry about embarrassment, others fear looking unprepared, and others simply just run out of time. Machines, however, remain infinitely patient. A student can ask the same question 5 different ways without any social consequence. And from one perspective, this represents a remarkable expansion of educational access. Human beings have always built tools that serve to extend. We extended our memory with writing. Books expanded access to knowledge across generations. Libraries organize this information at scale for all to be able to access. Calculators accelerated computation. And then search engines transformed retrieval. Now, each of these tools changed education in really profound ways. The calculator, for example, generated enormous educational debate. Would students lose foundational arithmetic skills? Or would the dependence on machines weaken their mathematical understanding? Yet over time, education adapted. Basic numeracy remained important, while higher-level mathematical reasoning became increasingly emphasized. And a similar pattern emerged with search engines. Students no longer needed to memorize information in the same way previous generations did. The educational value of memorization shifted. Retrieval became easier. Evaluation became more important. Now, today's generative AI systems represent another evolution in this long pattern of cognitive extension. But there's an important distinction here. Search engines retrieve information. These commonly used AI systems synthesize and explain it. That subtle difference has a real impact on education, because explanation occupies a central place in how humans learn. Teachers explain, mentors explain, your peers explain, your parents explain. Explanation is deeply connected to understanding itself. And throughout history, educational institutions have often been structured around access to these explanations, which means the widespread automation of explanation may influence education far beyond simple productivity gains. Now, at first glance, better explanations seem unquestionably beneficial, and they often are. Students who previously lacked access to support may now receive assistance instantly. Learners can move at their own pace, and these complex concepts can be reframed in multiple ways. But beneath this progress lies an important educational tension. Learning is not merely exposure to explanations. In many cases, learning emerges through effortful mental reconstruction. Now, psychologists studying cognition have repeatedly found that certain forms of difficulty strengthen long-term understanding. Struggle can deepen retention. Retrieval practice strengthens memory, and problem-solving effort improves transfer. This idea appeared earlier in our series through the concept of desirable difficulties. And conversational AI introduces a fascinating new variation of this challenge. When explanations become effortless to obtain, students may engage differently with uncertainty itself. Moments that once required sustained reflection can now be bypassed very quickly. Confusion becomes easier to escape, and this intellectual discomfort becomes easier to smooth over. Now, the paradox is subtle. Systems that improve access to explanation may simultaneously reduce some of the cognitive effort that it takes to create durable learning. And yet the answer is unlikely to involve rejecting the technology altogether. After all, educational history rarely moves backwards. Once these powerful tools emerge, societies tend to integrate them into learning rather than abandon them. The more meaningful question may concern how educational systems adapt around these tools. Perhaps certain foundational struggles become more important to preserve intentionally. Perhaps educators increasingly design activities where reasoning processes remain visible. And then perhaps classrooms shift towards interpretation, synthesis, debate, and application rather than simple explanation delivery. Because explanation alone has never guaranteed understanding. Anyone who has taught knows this instinctively. Students can sometimes repeat an explanation perfectly while still lacking any deep conceptual mastery. And occasionally, genuine understanding emerges only after some confusion, experimentation, and failure, which implies something important about human learning. Understanding is not simply transferred from one mind to another. In many ways, it is constructed. As intelligent systems become increasingly capable of explanation, the role of educators may evolve in very critical ways. Teachers have always done far more than deliver information. They motivate, they contextualize, they mentor, they cultivate curiosity, they recognize misunderstanding in their students, they create social environments for learning, and they help students develop confidence and intellectual identity. These human dimensions may become even more important in AI-enhanced educational environments. In the years ahead, educators may increasingly function as designers of cognitive experiences, helping students navigate uncertainty, structuring meaningful struggle, creating opportunities for collaboration and reflection, and then guiding learners toward this discernment and judgment of learning. And perhaps more importantly, helping students learn how to think alongside increasingly capable machines, because the future of education may involve a new form of intellectual partnership. Machines capable of generating explanations at extraordinary scale, and humans capable of asking meaningful questions, evaluating ideas, and connecting knowledge across these contexts, assigning human meaning to what they learn. The machine may explain, but learning still belongs to the learner. And educators may remain essential guides in helping that learning become deep, reflective, and profoundly human. Throughout the history of education, access to explanation has carried enormous value. Teachers, books, institutions, they've long served as guides through difficult ideas. And now intelligent systems are making explanation available at an extraordinary scale. And as always, the deeper educational questions emerge beneath the technology itself. How much struggle helps learning deepen? What kinds of effort build lasting understanding? And how should educational systems evolve when assistance becomes instantly available? The machine may increasingly help explain ideas, but understanding still develops through human thought, reflection, and experience. Educational technologies continue to evolve rapidly, but the deeper patterns of learning remain remarkably persistent. That's how we keep the cabinet open. Thanks for exploring the EdTech Curio cabinet. In 2015, a photograph circulated widely across the technology world. At first glance, it seemed unremarkable. It was a research image from an artificial intelligence dataset. The caption beneath it read, "Baseball." But the image was not of a baseball or of anyone playing baseball. It showed a young boy holding a toothbrush. The system had not actually recognized the object in the child's hand. Instead, it had associated the overall image with patterns it had seen elsewhere in its training data. To many researchers, this was a technical problem. It was a classification error. It was a flaw in the model. But for others, it represented something larger. A reminder that artificial intelligence systems do not simply emerge from mathematics alone. They inherit assumptions from data, from the people designing them, from the societies surrounding them. And among the researchers thinking deeply about these questions was Dr. Fei-Fei Li, a pioneering computer scientist whose work helped transform modern computer vision, and later an advocate for something increasingly important in the future of artificial intelligence: human-centered AI. Because as machines become increasingly capable of generating language, images, and making decisions, one question grows more significant. How do we ensure that intelligence remains connected to humanity? Welcome to the EdTech Curio Cabinet. I'm Christina, and in each episode, we explore the evolving world of education through 4 lenses: the artifact, an educational tool, technology, or practice shaping how people learn; the pattern, the deeper historical forces that help explain how we arrived here; the paradox, the tension hidden beneath the surface; and finally, the signal, a glimpse into where learning may be heading next. In this Curio, we're going to look at human-centered artificial intelligence. In 2019, the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence was formally launched under the co-direction of Fei-Fei Li and John Etchemendy. The name itself was telling, not simply Artificial Intelligence Institute, but human-centered AI. The distinction mattered. By this point, artificial intelligence research had already accelerated dramatically. Machine learning systems were achieving breakthroughs in image recognition, language generation, medical diagnostics, recommendation systems, and investment surged. Public fascination expanded, and conversations about automation intensified. Yet alongside this process came growing concerns around bias, privacy, the possibility of lost jobs, surveillance, and social inequality. In her memoir, The Worlds I See by Dr. Fei-Fei Li, she reflects repeatedly on the human dimensions surrounding AI research. Her story moves between technical breakthroughs and deeply personal experiences: immigration, family sacrifice, caregiving, education, and interdisciplinary collaboration. One of the most consistent themes in her work is the idea that intelligence cannot be separated from human context. AI systems influence real people, and increasingly, they shape systems central to society itself. They shape and impact healthcare. They shape and impact employment, media, government, and education. That recognition helped inspire a broader movement within AI research towards interdisciplinary collaboration. Computer scientists were working alongside ethicists, psychologists, neuroscientists, and educators, of course, because intelligence in practice does not exist in isolation from human life. And education may be one of the clearest examples of that reality. There is a recurring historical pattern surrounding major technological revolutions. Early stages often focus heavily on capability. Can the machine work? Can it scale? Can it outperform previous systems? What about optimizing production? Can it do that? Can it increase efficiency? Only later do broader societal questions begin to dominate public conversation. The Industrial Revolution transformed manufacturing long before labor protections fully emerged. Social media platforms expanded rapidly before we grappled seriously with the misinformation and mental health effects of it. And search engines reorganized access to information before the questions of algorithmic influence became widespread. Educational technologies have followed similar patterns. Initial conversations often emphasize access, scale, engagement, and efficiency. Later, these conversations evolved and start focusing more heavily on equity, pedagogy, inclusion, cognitive impact, and societal consequences. Artificial intelligence appears to be following this trajectory as well. The technical breakthroughs arrive first. The societal implications are now becoming increasingly visible. And education occupies a fascinating position within this pattern because educational systems do more than transfer information. They shape human development itself, which means the integration of AI into education raises questions extending far beyond productivity alone. So at first glance, artificial intelligence appears to be a highly technical field. It has algorithms, data sets, neural networks, compute infrastructure, and certainly those technical foundations matter enormously. But one of the paradoxes of advanced AI is this: as machines become more capable, human questions become more important than less. Questions like, what should students learn? How should systems make decisions? What perspectives are represented and what is considered fair? How should technology influence childhood development, and what forms of knowledge deserve protection and which ones preserve human agency? Those are not purely engineering questions. These are educational questions. They're ethical questions. They're human-based questions. And this tension becomes especially visible in learning environments. An AI system may generate feedback instantly, but should every form of feedback be automated? A system may optimize instructional pathways, but what form of exploration might disappear when learning becomes overly optimized? The paradox is profound. The more advanced artificial intelligence becomes, the more societies may rely deeply on human disciplines to guide its development responsibly. And education sits near the center of that conversation, because classrooms are among the first places where future generations learn how to relate to intelligent systems at all. One of the most encouraging signals emerging around AI is the growing recognition that technical capability alone is insufficient. Increasingly, major conversations about artificial intelligence involve collaboration across disciplines. Researchers in cognition, ethics, law, medicine, philosophy, and education are participating more actively in shaping AI development, and educators may become particularly important contributors in this future. Teachers work daily with misunderstanding, motivation, social learning, and intellectual growth. In other words, educators already operate inside profoundly human systems. That perspective may become increasingly valuable as AI enters schools and universities and workplaces. These perspectives may help society answer questions such as, how should humans learn alongside intelligent systems? What cognitive skills become more important in an AI-rich environment? And what forms of creativity and collaboration remain deeply valuable? And perhaps more importantly, how do we ensure that increasingly intelligent technologies continue to support human development? Because ultimately, education has always been about more than just information transfer. It concerns the development of people. And that may become even more important in the age of intelligent machines. Throughout history, technological revolutions have eventually forced societies to reconsider what they value most deeply. Artificial intelligence appears to be prompting a similar moment. As machines become increasingly capable of generating language, analysis, and explanations, human questions are moving closer to the center of the conversation. Questions about ethics, about judgment, about responsibility, and about human development itself. Those questions may prove especially important in education because schools do not simply produce knowledge, they help shape the people who will use it. Artificial intelligence continues to evolve rapidly, but human learning remains deeply social, cultural, and personal. That's why we keep the cabinet open. Thanks for exploring the EdTech Curio cabinet. In the 2010s, photographs from major AI conferences became symbols of a broader concern within the technology industry. Rows of attendees, overwhelmingly male, led commentators to describe some events as a sea of dudes, a phrase that became shorthand for the diversity challenges facing artificial intelligence research. At the simplest level, the phrase described representation. Who was present in the room? Who was absent? And who had access and potential influence? But beneath that surface was a deeper concern. Artificial intelligence systems learn from human-created data, human-created assumptions, and human-created institutions, which means the people building intelligent systems influence the perspectives embedded within them. And that has a marked impact on education, because educational systems already carry tremendous influence over opportunity, evaluation of an individual's ability, and future life outcomes. As AI increasingly participates in assessment, recommendation, and feedback, an important educational question emerges. What happens when intelligent systems inherit the blind spots of the societies that created them? Welcome to the EdTech Curio Cabinet. I'm Christina, and in each Curio we explore the evolving world of education through 4 lenses. The artifact, a technology, practice, or idea shaping modern learning. The pattern, the deeper historical forces surrounding it. The paradox, the unexpected tension hidden beneath the surface. And finally, the signal, a glimpse into where education may be heading next. In this Curio, we explore the sea of dudes problem and what it reveals about artificial intelligence, representation, and education. Over the past decade, researchers have documented numerous examples of bias emerging within AI systems. Facial recognition systems showed significantly different accuracy rates across demographic groups. Language models reproduced cultural stereotypes found in training data. Hiring algorithms reflected historical workplace imbalances, And image-generating systems reinforce the narrow assumptions around professions and identity. One of the most influential studies in this area was a 2018 paper, Gender Shades, by Buolamwini and Gebru. The researchers found substantial disparities in gender classification accuracy across skin tone and gender categories among several commercial AI systems. The study became widely discussed because it illustrated a real powerful reality. Technical systems can inherit human blind spots in ways that appear objective on the surface. Scholar Sophia Noble explored similar themes in Algorithms of Oppression, examining how search systems can reproduce social inequalities through seemingly neutral technological processes. And researcher Caroline Criado Perez later documented many related examples of gender data gaps in Invisible Women. Collectively, these works challenged a popular assumption surrounding AI, that computational systems naturally produce subjective outcomes simply because they rely on mathematics. And these questions become particularly important in educational environments because educational systems impact a student's journey based on its judgments. They decide who receives support, who receives opportunity, who is considered advanced and who is flagged as struggling, and ultimately, who gains confidence and who disengages. So if AI is increasingly participating in these processes, representation matters deeply. The Sea of Dudes problem is not unique to artificial intelligence. Throughout history, institutions have often reflected the assumptions of the people designing them. Medical research offers a powerful example. For decades, many clinical studies relied heavily on male participants. As a result, the classic heart attack symptoms taught to generations of physicians, this crushing chest pain and pain down the left arm, were based largely on how cardiac arrest presented in men. Women, however, they often experience different warning signs: unusual fatigue, nausea, or pain in the jaw and upper back. These symptoms don't scream cardiac arrest to classically trained physicians. When the evidence base is built from a narrow slice of the population, important patterns can remain hidden. This draws us in to recognize that incomplete data can produce incomplete understanding. Now, educational systems themselves contain many historical examples of this pattern. Curricula often emphasize certain histories while minimizing others. In Canada, generations of students learn detailed accounts of Confederation, settlement, and economic development, while Indigenous perspectives, things like treaty histories and the legacy of residential schools, receive far less attention, if any. The resulting history was decidedly incomplete. As additional voices and experiences were incorporated, society gained a fuller understanding of the same events. What we know is often shaped not only by the information we include, but by the information we leave out. Artificial intelligence introduces a new variation of this long-standing dynamic, because unlike traditional institutions, AI systems can scale rapidly and invisibly. Once deployed, algorithmic systems may influence millions of interactions simultaneously. They'll give out recommendations, they'll do evaluations, content rankings, adaptive pathways, and automated feedback. And because these systems often appear mathematically sophisticated, their outputs can carry an aura of neutrality even when the underlying biases remain present. That combination makes educational caution particularly important, especially when intelligence systems begin participating in decisions influencing student trajectories. One of the central promises surrounding the use of machines in operations, and AI in general, is objectivity. It is assumed that machines will reduce human bias. Algorithms would improve consistency, and as such, automation would produce fairer outcomes. And in some contexts, these improvements may genuinely occur. But the paradox is more complicated. AI systems are trained using human-generated data, which means they can inherit historical patterns embedded within society itself. And because these systems operate computationally, their outputs can appear more authoritative than they actually are. A recommendation generated by software may feel objective even when shaped by deeply subjective historical data. This creates a particularly important tension in education. Educational systems already carry immense influence over confidence and opportunity. If intelligent education systems quietly reproduce narrow assumptions around language, behavior, identity, or ability, those effects may accumulate subtly over time. Yet, there is another layer to this paradox. The growing awareness of bias in AI is itself helping broaden participation in the field. Researchers from increasingly diverse backgrounds are contributing to new perspectives to dataset construction, evaluating fairness and accessibility in educational design. In other words, the visibility of the problem is helping reshape the discipline itself. One of the most hopeful signals surrounding AI today is the growing recognition that intelligent systems require broad human perspectives, and that expansion matters. Educational systems influence diverse learners across cultures, languages, developmental stages, and lived experiences. No single perspective can fully represent that complexity. And perhaps one of the most important educational lessons emerging from AI is that the people designing systems shape the systems themselves. Which means diversity within educational technology development is not simply organizational optics. It directly influences how learning environments function. As future generations increasingly learn alongside intelligent systems, educators may help ensure those systems remain inclusive and responsive to human diversity. Because education works best when more learners can recognize themselves within it. And the future of AI-enhanced learning may depend on how many voices are invited into the room when these systems are built. Educational systems have always reflected the society surrounding them. Artificial intelligence does not remove that reality. In many ways, it makes it more visible. As intelligent systems increasingly participate in learning, assessment, and feedback, questions of representation and inclusion become deeply educational questions. Who builds the system matters. Whose experiences shape the data matters. And whose perspectives are present in the design process also matters. Because intelligence alone does not guarantee fairness, human judgment remains essential to it. Artificial intelligence may reshape education in profound ways, but educational systems still inherit human values, assumptions, and priorities. That's why we keep the cabinet open. Thanks for exploring the EdTech Curio cabinet. For decades, educational technologies have steadily reduced friction around information. Search engines eliminated much of the need to physically navigate libraries. Spell check reduced attention to mechanical writing errors. Navigation systems diminished the importance of memorizing routes and maps. Now, artificial intelligence is extending this process even further. Machines increasingly help people retrieve information, organize ideas, summarize documents, generate drafts, and provide solutions to problems. In many ways, these systems function as extensions of ourselves. They do not simply store knowledge, they participate in the thinking processes themselves. And that raises another curious educational question. As intelligent systems increasingly carry portions of cognitive labor for us, how does human thinking change in response? Welcome to the EdTech Curio Cabinet. I'm Christina, and in each Curio, we explore the evolving world of education through 4 lenses. The artifact, a tool, practice, or technology shaping modern learning. The pattern, the historical forces surrounding it. The paradox, the tension hidden beneath the surface. And finally, the signal, a glimpse into where education may be heading next. In this Curio, we'll dive into the concept of cognitive offloading in the outsourced mind. One of the defining characteristics of modern AI systems is their ability to reduce cognitive workload. Students can now ask intelligent systems to summarize research papers, to organize their lecture notes, generate study notes and flashcards, create outlines, and even draft written responses. In professional settings, similar systems increasingly assist with scheduling, communication, analytics, documentation, and decision support. This phenomenon is sometimes described as cognitive offloading, the process of using external tools to reduce the mental effort required for certain tasks. Importantly, cognitive offloading is not new. Humans have always externalized aspects of cognition. Writing allowed memory to move beyond the limitations of the brain. Maps externalized navigation. Calculators externalized arithmetic computation. But humans have also long externalized thought in a more personal way. Developmental psychologist Lev Vygotsky observed that children often talk to themselves while solving problems. What he called private speech was not a sign of distraction, but a mechanism for organizing attention, for planning actions, and regulating thought. Over time, much of this self-directed dialogue becomes internalized as silent reasoning. Modern neuroscience continues to support the idea that making thoughts visible, whether through writing, speaking, sketching, or discussion, can strengthen cognitive processing. In many ways, humans have always used external tools to help themselves think. Philosopher Andy Clark and cognitive scientist David Chalmers later extended this idea through their influential theory of the extended mind, arguing that tools and environments can become integrated into human cognitive processes themselves. From this perspective, notebooks, whiteboards, smartphones, search engines, and AI assistants are not entirely separate from thought. They become part of how humans think. Artificial intelligence may represent the next major evolution of this relationship, because unlike earlier tools, AI systems increasingly participate dynamically in reasoning processes rather than simply storing information. And education now finds itself at the center of that transition. Throughout history, new cognitive tools have repeatedly transformed educational priorities, and each technological shift triggered anxiety alongside opportunity. Socrates himself reportedly worried that writing would weaken memory by encouraging dependence on external records. Centuries later, similar concerns appeared around calculators in mathematics classrooms. Would students lose foundational skills? Would convenience weaken understanding? And yet education consistently adapted. Certain skills diminished in importance, while others became more valuable. As information retrieval became easier through search engines, educational emphasis gradually shifted toward evaluation, synthesis, and interpretation. Researchers studying cognition have observed similar patterns repeatedly. As tools absorb certain mental tasks, human attention often shifts towards higher-order forms of thinking. Memory gives way to interpretation. Calculation gives way to modeling. And retrieval gives way to judgment. The challenge is not whether cognition changes, but which forms of cognition become more important as a result. Today's AI systems may represent another step in this historical pattern, but this transition feels different in one important way. Previous tools largely supported isolated cognitive functions, but modern AI systems increasingly operate across many of these functions simultaneously. They summarize, generate, compare, explain, and even imitate reasoning itself. That breadth makes the educational implications more profound, because cognition is about developing mental structures through effort and practice, not just producing outputs. And that introduces a significant paradox. AI systems can dramatically increase human productivity. Students may complete tasks more efficiently, professionals may process information more rapidly, and cognitive burdens may decrease across many forms of work. In many contexts, this creates genuine value. But education introduces a unique complication. Learning often depends on the very cognitive effort these systems reduce. Writing helps clarify thought. In fact, the act of generating explanations may be part of learning itself. Students often discover what they truly understand only when they attempt to explain an idea aloud, or defend a position, or articulate reasoning step by step. What appears externally as communication is often an internal process of thought becoming visible. Problem-solving develops reasoning pathways. Retrieval strengthens memory. Drafting, revising, and struggling with ideas contribute to conceptual understanding. When intelligent systems absorb portions of that effort, the relationship between performance and learning becomes less straightforward. The paradox here is subtle. Tools that increase immediate capability can sometimes reduce opportunities for deep mastery if used without reflection. And yet history suggests that abandoning powerful cognitive tools is rarely realistic or even productive. So in light of historical patterns that are right in front of us, how should educational systems integrate AI while preserving meaningful cognitive engagement? Perhaps some activities increasingly prioritize process visibility rather than the final answers. Perhaps classrooms place greater emphasis on interpretation, critique, and collaborative thinking, because education concerns the development of human capability itself. And that capability still grows through participation in thinking, not merely exposure to results. As AI systems become increasingly integrated into daily cognition, one educational skill may grow especially important: metacognition, the ability to think about thinking. Throughout history, humans have developed ways of making thought visible through writing, discussion, reflection, and even talking to themselves while solving problems. These practices help learners monitor understanding, identify misconceptions, and regulate their own learning. Artificial intelligence introduces a new layer to this process. Students may increasingly need to understand when to rely on AI assistance versus when independent reasoning matters. They need to learn how to verify generated information and recognize how cognitive shortcuts influence understanding. Discernment may become as important as retrieval once was. and educators may place a crucial role in helping students develop this awareness. Future classrooms may spend more time exploring how we evaluate machine-generated explanations, or when does automation support learning, or how does it diminish engagement, and what forms of struggle remain educationally valuable. These are not simply technical questions. They're cognitive and philosophical ones. And encouragingly, education is already well positioned to explore them. Teachers routinely help students move beyond memorization through reflection, interpretation, and judgment. Because even in the world filled with intelligent systems, humans still decide what matters, what deserves attention, and what forms of understanding are worth developing. Human beings have always shaped their thinking through tools. Writing changed memory, libraries changed access to knowledge, search engines changed information retrieval, and even before modern technologies existed, humans learned to externalize thought through speech, conversation, and reflection. Artificial intelligence may now be changing cognition itself more directly by participating in processes that once occurred entirely within the learner. And as always, education faces a similar challenge, preserving deep human learning while integrating increasingly powerful tools. So the question really becomes whether we will remain active participants in our own thinking as intelligent systems think alongside us. Educational tools continue to evolve alongside human cognition, but meaningful learning still develops through engagement, reflection, and practice. That's why we keep the cabinet open. Thanks for exploring the EdTech Curio cabinet. Increasingly, the educators I speak with describe the following experience. For years, they saw familiar patterns in student submissions of work. Strong arguments, weak conclusions, the occasional awkward phrasing, and those moments where a student's genuine voice emerged clearly through imperfect writing. But now something feels different. The grammar is polished, the structure is coherent, the transitions are smooth, and the citations appear correctly formatted. And yet, the professor hesitates. Did the student write this? Day after day, educators are encountering variations of this moment of hesitation, asking themselves, whose work am I grading? Generative AI systems can now produce almost anything that is assigned to students for graded work. Essays, programming assignments, discussion posts, mathematical explanations, and even complex analytical responses within seconds. The technology is advancing rapidly, and the systems that are designed to ensure academic integrity remain imperfect, just as institutional policies evolve in order to keep up. But beneath the immediate concerns surrounding academic integrity lies a deeper educational question. For centuries, education operated in a world where answers were difficult to obtain. What happens when answers become abundant, instantaneous, and nearly free? Welcome to the EdTech Curio Cabinet. I'm Christina, and in each Curio, we explore the evolving world of education through 4 lenses. The artifact, a technology, practice, or idea shaping modern learning. The pattern, the historical forces surrounding it. The paradox, the tension hidden beneath the surface. And finally, the signal, a glimpse into where education may be heading next. In this Curio, we'll dig into the challenges that are right in front of us today. Assessment in the age of generative artificial intelligence. Generative AI systems have introduced something historically unusual into education: near instant answer generation across an enormous range of disciplines. Students at almost any level can now request a draft of an essay that was intended to be synthesized after research and exploration. Worked mathematical solutions that pull from foundational knowledge and procedural fluency. Generated code, scientific explanations, and personalized study materials. Many outputs appear remarkably sophisticated, and these systems continue to improve rapidly. Educational institutions have responded in various ways. Some schools introduced AI detection tools. Others revised academic integrity policies. Some have temporarily returned to handwritten or oral assessments. And others have begun to experiment with AI-inclusive assignments designed around collaboration with intelligent systems. The speed of change has created understandable uncertainty, but it is worth remembering that educational assessment has always evolved alongside technology. Calculators changed mathematics assessment, internet access altered research assignments, and online learning environments transformed quiz delivery and feedback systems. Generative AI may present the latest and perhaps most disruptive chapter in this long history. Because unlike previous tools, these systems can generate complete intellectual artifacts rather than merely assisting with isolated tasks. And that challenges some long-standing assumptions about how learning is measured. Looking back at educational history, assessment systems have proven remarkably stable. Even as classrooms adopted computers, projectors, LMS systems, and online content, many assessment structures remain deeply familiar. We continue to employ timed exams. Essays are still a common way to explore a student's understanding and ability to communicate what they have synthesized from broad swaths of information. We still use multiple choice tests and ask for written reports. And there are good reasons for this stability. Assessment carries enormous social importance. Its outcomes affect future life trajectories, and so education systems tend to change cautiously. This pattern appeared earlier in our series when we explored the persistence of traditional assessment models, despite technological advancement. And yet, history also shows that major technological shifts eventually influence evaluation systems themselves. The printing press altered scholarly examination. Calculators reshaped mathematical expectations. Digital research transformed citation practices. And so now, artificial intelligence may be forcing another reassessment, particularly because generative systems complicate a long-standing educational assumption that completed work reliably reflects independent cognitive effort. And this tension sits at the heart of the current moment. At first glance, AI-generated answers appear to threaten assessment itself. If machines can produce essays, explanations, and solutions quickly, how can educators evaluate student understanding reliably? The concern is understandable, but beneath it lies a more interesting paradox. As answer generation becomes easier, authentic thinking may become more valuable rather than less. Historically, education often emphasized the production of correct answers, partly because generating those answers required significant effort. Now, many forms of production can be partially automated, which shifts educational attention towards different dimensions of learning. Shifts towards reasoning, interpretation, judgment, creativity, collaboration, and contextual understanding. A student may generate an essay outline instantly using AI, but defending an argument verbally still requires understanding. Applying knowledge to unfamiliar context still requires reasoning, and collaborative problem solving still depends on human interaction. In other words, AI may be exposing a distinction that has existed all along, the difference between producing academic artifacts and developing intellectual capability. For decades, educators have debated whether grades truly measure learning. Critics have long argued that students often learn to optimize for performance rather than understanding, to earn points, complete assignments, and satisfy evaluation criteria, without necessarily developing deep mastery of the underlying concepts. In that sense, the tension between evidence of learning and learning itself is not new. What artificial intelligence changes is the visibility of that distinction. When a machine can generate an essay, solve a problem set, summarize a reading, or produce a plausible answer in seconds, the traditional academic artifact becomes a less reliable indicator of the thinking that produced it. AI is not creating the weakness in the measurement system, it's revealing it. The paradox is fascinating. Systems capable of generating answers may ultimately push education towards evaluating deeper forms of thinking, reasoning, judgment, problem framing, reflection, and the ability to apply knowledge in an unfamiliar context. Not because knowledge becomes irrelevant, but because abundant automation forces us to look more carefully at what we have actually been measuring all along. One of the most promising signals emerging from this moment is the growing creativity educators are bringing to assessment design. Around the world, instructors are experimenting with oral defenses, project-based learning, authentic simulations, reflective journals, live demonstrations, and process-oriented evaluation. Importantly, many educators are not simply resisting AI, they are exploring how intelligent systems might coexist with meaningful assessment. Some classrooms now allow AI systems while requiring students to explain how the tool was used, what decisions they made, what did they revise, and of course, why did they make those decisions? This begins shifting assessment away from simple output evaluation and towards intellectual process. And perhaps that evolution was already overdue. because real-world professional environments rarely isolate individuals from tools. Scientists use software, engineers use simulation systems, writers use editing technologies, and programmers use coding assistants. The educational challenge may increasingly evolve, helping students learn how to work thoughtfully, ethically, and competently alongside an intelligent system. And educators remain central to that future, because meaningful assessment has never been purely about catching mistakes. At its best, assessment helps reveal understanding. That purpose remains deeply human, even as technologies evolve. Assessment systems have always reflected the technological environment surrounding them. Artificial intelligence may now be accelerating a new period of reassessment. As answer generation becomes increasingly automated, educational systems may place greater emphasis on reasoning and process, judgment and application. And throughout this transition, one principle remains remarkably consistent. Learning matters more than performance alone, because education has always concerned the development of human understanding. Assessment technologies continue to evolve alongside human learning, but the deeper goals of education remain remarkably persistent. That's why we keep the cabinet open. Thanks for exploring the EdTech Curio cabinet. In the last Curio, we explored how artificial intelligence is beginning to share in our thinking, helping us retrieve information, organize ideas, summarize knowledge, and even solve problems. Now, another question is beginning to emerge. What happens when machines don't simply think with us, but begin creating alongside us? More than 50 years ago, Japanese roboticist Masahiro Mori observed something very curious. As robots became more human-like, people generally responded more positively, until suddenly they didn't. At a certain point, almost human became unsettling. A robot that appeared 95% human often felt less comfortable than one that looked obviously mechanical. He called this phenomenon the uncanny valley. Today we may be discovering a creative version of that same valley. Artificial intelligence can now generate paintings that resemble great masters, compose orchestral music, write poetry, produce films. And technically, many of these creations are astonishing. Yet many people still instinctively feel that something is missing. Not because the work is poorly executed, not at all, but because it seems to lack the subtle evidence of human experience. And that raises an educational question. If machines can increasingly imitate creativity, what exactly are we teaching when we teach students to be creative? Welcome to the EdTech Curio Cabinet. I'm Christina, and with each Curio we explore the evolving world of education through 4 lenses. The artifact, a technology, practice, or idea shaping learning. The pattern, the deeper historical forces surrounding it. The paradox, the tension hidden beneath the surface. And finally, the signal, a glimpse into where education may be heading next. In this Curio, we explore synthetic creativity, authentic expression, and how creative intelligence may reshape not only creative work, but the way education recognizes and evaluates it. Generative AI systems have dramatically expanded who can create. With only a few prompts, students can now generate illustrations, music, videos, stories, animations. What once demanded years of technical training can increasingly begin with just curiosity. For many learners, this is enormously empowering. Students who once struggled with drawing can visualize ideas. Writers can rapidly explore multiple storylines, and musicians can experiment with arrangements that they may have never attempted before. Creative expression is becoming more accessible. But accessibility introduces an important educational challenge. Creative disciplines have rarely evaluated only the finished artifact. Art students submit sketchbooks. Design students defend their choices during critiques. Writers receive multiple drafts, and musicians rehearse before a performance. Long before generative AI arrived, educators recognized that creativity is revealed through the process as much as the final product. The artifact is evidence, but so is the thinking behind it. Technology has repeatedly transformed artistic practice. Photography changed painting. Recording technologies transformed music. Digital illustration reshaped graphic design, and computer animation revolutionized filmmaking. Each innovation initially generated concern that authentic creativity might disappear. But instead, creativity evolved. In Art as Experience, educational philosopher John Dewey argued that art derives its meaning not simply from the object itself, but from the lived experiences that shape both its creation and its interpretation. Art is not merely something we produce, it's something we experience. Later, educator Eliot Eisner argued that arts education develops forms of thinking that cannot be measured by simple right or wrong answers. It requires judgment, interpretation, it requires imagination, the ability to perceive relationships. These became central educational outcomes. And importantly, creativity has never existed in isolation. It is shaped by culture, by experience and feedback and iteration. You might be hearing a pattern here of what we've said in multiple times in previous Curios. Artificial intelligence changes one participant within that creative ecosystem, but it does not replace the human experience that gives creativity its meaning. As AI-generated work becomes increasingly sophisticated, something unexpected may happen. Technical excellence becomes easier to achieve, and authenticity becomes more difficult to recognize. Perhaps creative work is entering its own uncanny valley. An AI-generated painting may appear beautiful, and a poem may sound profound, and even a song may evoke emotion. Yet many people instinctively continue asking different questions. Who experienced this? Why was it created? What does it mean? Whose perspective does it actually represent? Educational theorist Donald Schoen described creative practice as a process of reflection in action, continually interpreting, evaluating, and reshaping one's own ideas while they're creating. That reflective dialogue may become increasingly valuable as AI assumes more of the technical production. Because true creativity is not simply producing something new, it's producing something meaningful. And that paradox is compelling. As synthetic creativity becomes abundant, education may place even greater value on what remains uniquely human: perspective, intention, reflection, curiosity, meaning. AI challenges us to articulate what authentic creativity has always been. Now, perhaps the most important shift will not be in creative technology. It will be in creative assessment. Rather than asking, can the student produce this? Educators may increasingly ask, how did this idea evolve? What choices were made, and why were they made? What unique perspective does this work communicate? This would not represent an entirely new approach. Studio-based learning has long emphasized critiques. It routinely evaluates reflection, iteration, revision, artist statements, and even design journals. Artificial intelligence may simply make these forms of evidence more important than ever. And students may increasingly submit creative portfolios that include drafts and prompt histories, reflection journals, design rationale, and documentation of their creative evolution. AI itself may become another creative instrument, just like a camera or digital editing software. The educational emphasis shifts away from proving who produced the artifact toward understanding how the creative thinking unfolded. Artificial intelligence is transforming creative production at extraordinary speed. But perhaps creativity has never been defined by production alone. Photography did not eliminate painting, and digital tools did not eliminate music. Creative technologies expanded the ways people expressed ideas, and perhaps AI will do the same. As John Dewey suggested nearly a century ago, meaningful art grows from lived experience. Artificial intelligence can imitate patterns, but human beings interpret life. And maybe that is why AI-generated work can sometimes feel strangely incomplete, not because it lacks technical quality, but because we instinctively search for traces of another person's experience. Perhaps the future of creativity is about recognizing what only human experience can mean, rather than distinguishing between human versus AI-generated final works. As artificial intelligence becomes an increasingly capable creative partner, education may find itself returning to questions that it has always asked. What makes creative work meaningful? What makes an idea original? What evidence reveals authentic human understanding? Because perhaps creativity was never simply about making something beautiful. It has always been about making something that reflects how we see the world. And that may become more valuable than ever. That's why we keep the cabinet open. Thanks for exploring the EdTech Curio cabinet. In 1966, computer scientist Joseph Weizenbaum created one of the earliest conversational computer programs, ELIZA. Technically, ELIZA was relatively simple. The program largely rephrased user statements into questions using scripted conversational patterns. And yet something surprising happened. People became attributing emotional understanding to the machine. Some users formatted unexpectedly personal connections with the system, even after knowing it was not conscious. Weizenbaum himself became deeply unsettled by how quickly humans projected empathy and understanding onto the software. Decades later, conversational artificial intelligence has become vastly more sophisticated. Modern systems can maintain extended dialogue, adapt tone, simulate encouragement, and respond in ways that often feel socially fluent. Increasingly, students interact with AI systems not merely as tools, but as conversational partners during learning itself. And that raises an important educational question. What happens when learning technologies begin to feel socially human? Welcome to the EdTech Curio Cabinet. I'm Christina, and in each Curio we explore the evolving world of education through 4 lenses. The artifact, a technology, practice, or idea shaping learning. The pattern, the historical forces surrounding it. The paradox, the tension hidden beneath the surface. And finally, the signal, a glimpse into where education may be heading next. In this Curio, we explore the synthetic companion. One of the most distinctive characteristics of modern AI systems is their conversational fluency. Students can increasingly interact with intelligent systems through natural dialogue, asking follow-up questions, requesting encouragement, or receiving personalized feedback. This interaction feels fundamentally different from traditional educational software. Earlier technologies often relied heavily on menus and forms, quizzes, and structured pathways. Modern conversational systems instead create the impression of a responsive social interaction. Researchers sometimes describe this phenomenon through concepts such as social computing and parasocial interaction, where humans form relational responses to mediated systems. Sherry Turkle explored related themes in Alone Together, examining how humans increasingly relate socially to digital technologies. In The Media Equation by Clifford Nass and Byron Reeves, they argued that humans often respond socially to computers and media systems even when fully aware they are interacting with machines. Educational AI systems now operate directly within this dynamic. A learner may feel more comfortable asking an AI tutor simple questions repeatedly. Students may perceive conversational systems as patient, supportive, and non-judgmental. Some learners may even experience greater confidence when practicing skills privately with an AI system before engaging socially with peers or instructors. And from an educational perspective, these developments carry both intriguing opportunities and important complexities. Human learning has never been purely informational. Long before formal schools existed, learning occurred through apprenticeship, storytelling, mentorship, and participation within communities. Educational theorist Lev Vygotsky argued that learning develops socially before it becomes internalized individually. Similarly, psychologist Albert Bandura emphasized the importance of observation, modeling, and social interaction in human development. Even modern classrooms remain deeply social environments. Students learn partly through discussion, encouragement, identity formation, and shared intellectual experience. And teachers do far more than deliver information. They motivate, they reassure, they interpret confusion, they recognize emotional states, and they help learners persist through uncertainty. Technology has historically struggled to replicate these relational dimensions of education. But conversational AI systems are beginning to simulate aspects of social interaction in ways earlier educational technologies could not. And that introduces a fascinating paradox. At first glance, conversational AI appears capable of making learning more supportive and accessible. And in many ways, it genuinely can. Students may receive immediate feedback, and language learners may practice without fear of embarrassment, and personalized support may become available at extraordinary scale. Yet beneath these benefits lies a deeper tension. AI systems can simulate empathy convincingly, but simulation and human understanding are not identical things. A conversational model may produce supportive language, but it does not possess lived experience, emotional reciprocity, or genuine human care in the way teachers, mentors, and peers do. Philosopher Hubert Dreyfus argued that human understanding is deeply embodied and socially situated, rather than purely computational. And education reflects this reality very strongly. Students often remember teachers not simply because they explained content effectively, but because they inspired confidence, or they recognized their struggles and encouraged their growth, or changed how students saw themselves. These relational dimensions of learning matter profoundly. The paradox then is subtle but important. As conversational AI systems become more socially fluent, human educational relationships may become more valuable, because authentic mentorship, care, and human recognition carry forms of meaning difficult to automate fully. And perhaps the growing presence of synthetic companionship may help clarify which dimensions of education are fundamentally relational. One of the most hopeful signals emerging from conversational AI is the possibility of expanding educational support while simultaneously deepening awareness of the importance of human mentorship. AI systems increasingly help provide low-stakes practice, accessibility assistance, and continuous availability. These capabilities may meaningfully reduce barriers for many learners. In this environment, educators may increasingly focus on dimensions of learning that machines cannot fully replicate. Things like intellectual community, the feeling of belonging, ethical guidance, and identity formation. Future classrooms may place even greater emphasis on discussion, reflection, teamwork, and shared inquiry, precisely because information support becomes more automated. And perhaps this represents one of the most important educational insights of the AI era. Learning is not simply the transfer of information into isolated minds. It is also participation in communities of thought. Teachers help students feel that they belong within a discipline, and they are capable of contributing ideas, that their confusion is survivable, and that growth is possible. Those human dimensions of education may become increasingly visible as conversational systems continue improving, because intelligent machines may support learning effectively, but human relationships still give learning meaning. Educational technologies have long focused on improving access to information. Conversational AI introduces something different: systems that increasingly participate in the social experience of learning itself. And throughout educational history, learning has always depended on more than the explanation alone. Humans learn through encouragement, mentorship, and shared intellectual experience. As intelligent systems become more conversational and socially fluent, education may gain a deeper appreciation for those relational dimensions rather than moving beyond them. Conversational technologies continue evolving rapidly, but human relationships remain central to how people learn, grow, and develop confidence. That's why we keep the cabinet open. Thanks for exploring the EdTech Curio cabinet. In 1997, IBM's Deep Blue defeated world chess champion Garry Kasparov. At that time, the event felt historic, partly because chess had long been viewed as a uniquely human intellectual activity. It required strategy, foresight, creativity, and pattern recognition. If a machine could compete with the world's greatest chess player, many wondered what other forms of human expertise might eventually become automatable. Years later, systems such as AlphaGo received similar breakthroughs in the game of Go, a game many experts believe would resist machine mastery for decades because of its intuitive and highly complex nature. And today, artificial intelligence systems can now generate essays, compose music, explain calculus, summarize research, and engage in increasingly sophisticated dialogue. Across only a few decades, machines have moved steadily closer to forms of activity once considered deeply human. Which raises one final educational question for this series. As intelligent systems become increasingly capable, what remains distinctly valuable about human learning itself? Welcome to the EdTech Curio Cabinet. I'm Christina, and throughout the series, we've explored the evolving world of education through 4 lenses: the artifact, a tool, technology, or practice shaping learning; the pattern, the historical and cultural forces surrounding it; the paradox, the tension hidden beneath the surface; and finally, the signal, a glimpse into where education may be heading next. In this final curio, we're going to explore the search for the last human skill. One of the most striking developments in the past decade has been the emergence of systems capable of generating outputs that resemble human intellectual work. Large language models can now produce explanations and computer programs, research summaries, creative writing. Image generation systems can produce sophisticated visual compositions. Scientific AI systems increasingly assist with protein folding, materials discovery, and data analysis. Researchers such as Geoffrey Hinton, Jan LeCun, and Demis Hassabis have helped shape many of the breakthroughs underlying modern machine learning systems. At the same time, public conversations around AI often focus on capability. What can machines do? Which professions might change? What tasks might become automated? Education has become deeply connected to these questions because schools and universities help prepare people for the participation in intellectual and professional life. Historically, many educational systems emphasized knowledge acquisition, partly because access to information was so limited. Memorization carried high value in information-scarce environments, and procedural fluency mattered because calculation and production required substantial human effort. But increasingly, intelligence systems can perform portions of those activities rapidly and at scale. And this creates an impactful educational moment. Because when machines become capable of generating information and outputs efficiently, human learning begins shifting towards different forms of value. Throughout history, technological revolutions have repeatedly reshaped which human skills societies value most highly. The Industrial Revolution automated forms of physical labor while increasing demand for organizational, managerial, and technical expertise. The Computer Revolution automated many forms of calculation while increasing demand for analytical and creative work. And the Internet transformed access to information while elevating the importance of navigation, evaluation, and synthesis. Economist David Autor has written extensively about how technological change often alters the composition of work, rather than simply eliminating human participation altogether. Similarly, historians have argued that educational systems increasingly face the challenge of preparing students for rapidly changing environments where adaptability matters more than static expertise. Educational history reflects these shifts very clearly. At different moments, schools emphasize memorization, classical rhetoric, industrial discipline, scientific reasoning, and collaborative problem solving. Importantly, older skills rarely disappeared entirely, but the relative value of certain capacities evolved alongside the technological conditions. Artificial intelligence may now represent another major transition in this long pattern. Yet unlike many previous technologies, AI increasingly operates within domains associated with cognition itself. It operates within writing and reasoning, communication, creativity, which is precisely why this moment feels so culturally significant, because it touches activities humans often associate with identity and intelligence. And that leads to a profound paradox. At first glance, increasingly capable AI systems can appear to diminish the importance of human expertise. If machines can generate explanations and solve problems, what remains uniquely valuable for humans to develop? Yet history suggests a more complicated possibility. Technological progress often increases the importance of distinctly human judgment rather than eliminating it. As information becomes abundant, discernment becomes more valuable. As automation expands, adaptability becomes more important. And as synthetic content proliferates, trust and interpretation gain significance. And perhaps more importantly, as machines become increasingly capable of imitation, authentic human perspective may become more visible. Philosopher Hannah Arendt once described thinking as more than mechanical problem solving. Human thought also involves reflection, ethics, responsibility, and meaning-making. Similarly, psychologist Howard Gardner argued that human intelligence is multifaceted, involving interpersonal understanding, creativity, moral reasoning, and contextual judgment alongside analytical capability. Artificial intelligence systems excel at identifying and reproducing patterns. But human learning has always involved something broader than pattern recognition alone. We assign meaning. We navigate ambiguity. We interpret experience emotionally and socially. And we decide what deserves attention and care. Education reflects these distinctions strongly. A student learning history is not simply retrieving dates. They are developing perspective about society and human behavior. A student learning literature is not merely processing language, they're exploring emotions, identity, and interpretation. And a student studying science is not simply memorizing formulas, they're learning how to ask questions, test ideas, and explain the natural world. The paradox becomes increasingly fascinating. The closer machines move towards forms of intelligence once considered uniquely human, the more education may shift towards cultivating deeply human capacities that are difficult to reduce to prediction and automation, because access to powerful tools often clarify what we value most deeply. One of the strongest signals emerging from this technological moment is the gradual reframing of what education may ultimately be for. For centuries, educational systems partly functioned as mechanisms for transmitting scarce knowledge efficiently across generations. That role remains important, but information itself is no longer scarce in the way it once was. Increasingly, educational value may center less on access to information and more on helping learners navigate complexity wisely. This may place growing emphasis on judgment, ethical reasoning, interdisciplinary thinking and communication, and intellectual adaptability. Importantly, these are not soft alternatives to knowledge. They depend upon knowledge, and they also require interpretation and human context. Researchers have long argued that human intelligence involves analogy, abstraction, self-awareness, and layered contextual understanding that extends beyond simple computational output. Similarly, Fei-Fei Li repeatedly emphasized that intelligence must remain connected to human values and lived experience. And this may become one of the defining educational responsibilities of the coming decades. Helping students learn how to think alongside intelligent systems without surrendering human agency to them. Helping learners evaluate machine-generated outputs critically, ask meaningful questions, and navigate increasingly complex information environments. In many ways, educators are already deeply prepared for this role. As we've explored in earlier Curios, teaching has never been solely about information delivery. Teachers help students develop confidence, help them tolerate uncertainty, and help them grow intellectually over time. Those profoundly human dimensions of education may become increasingly important in AI-rich environments. And perhaps this is one of the most hopeful signals of all. Artificial intelligence may ultimately push educational systems towards a deeper recognition of the value of human judgment, the value of human empathy and curiosity, and wisdom. Because human flourishing requires more than productivity and efficiency alone. Across 4 seasons of the EdTech Curio Cabinet, we've explored lectures, assessments, educational systems, artificial intelligence, creativity, cognition, and global learning networks. And beneath all of those curiosities, certain patterns continued appearing again and again. Technology changes rapidly. Human learning evolves more slowly. Educational systems continuously balance efficiency with depth. And every generation eventually confronts the same enduring questions. What knowledge matters? How do humans develop understanding? What should future generations inherit? And what forms of learning help people flourish within a changing world? Artificial intelligence now brings these questions into sharper focus, because for the first time, many educational technologies no longer simply store or distribute knowledge. Increasingly, they're participating in generating it. And yet throughout the season, another pattern also emerged repeatedly. The more capable machines become, the more important certain human qualities appear. Judgment, interpretation, ethics, creativity, perspective, empathy, and of course, curiosity. All practical capacities for navigating complexity responsibly. Education may therefore be entering an important transition, less centered on memorizing isolated information and more focused on helping learners think critically, interpret wisely, and collaborate meaningfully, remaining thoughtfully human while increasingly technological environments surround them. And perhaps that was always the deepest purpose of education all along, not merely producing answers, but cultivating people. Technology will continue changing. Artificial intelligence will continue evolving, and educational systems will continue adapting. And through all of it, humanity will likely continue asking the same persistent questions about knowledge, meaning, learning, and purpose. That enduring curiosity is part of what makes education such a profoundly human endeavor. Across this series, we've explored artifacts, patterns, paradoxes, and signals from the evolving world of education. But perhaps the most important insight is this. The future of learning will not be shaped by technology alone. It will also be shaped by the human choices surrounding it. By educators, by students, researchers, by institutions, and by the societies deciding what kinds of learning matter most. That's why we keep the cabinet open. But for now, we'll gently close it. Thank you for exploring the EdTech Curio Cabinet, and wherever learning goes next, keep asking curious questions. Before we close the cabinet for the final time, it's worth pausing for a moment to reflect on the journey we've taken together across these 4 seasons. When the EdTech Curio Cabinet began, the goal was never simply to discuss education technology. There were already many places to hear about product launches, emerging tools, platform features, and industry trends. This series explored something different, the deeper patterns beneath educational change, the assumptions that shape how societies teach and learn, the recurring tensions between efficiency and understanding, the ways technology repeatedly transforms education while leaving certain human questions remarkably unsolved. In Season 1, we explored the enduring structures of education, the lecture that continues to survive generation after generation, the persistence of assessment systems, the role of productive struggle in learning, and the strange durability of educational traditions even during periods of rapid technological change. In Season 2, we shifted towards emerging technologies and the expanding role of artificial intelligence in learning environments. We explored adaptive systems, AI tutors, personalization, academic integrity, and the evolving relationship between educators and intelligent tools. And then in Season 3, we widened the lens further outward. We examined global educational systems and the cultural assumptions embedded within them. Why some countries consistently excel in mathematics, how examination systems shape learning behavior, and why Nordic models emphasize trust in teachers. How engineering pipelines differ across societies and how universities anchor innovation systems. Then in Season 4, we arrived at perhaps the deepest questions of the series, the evolving relationship between human cognition and intelligent machines. We explored conversational AI and the automation of explanation, human-centered artificial intelligence, cognitive offloading and the outsourced mind, synthetic creativity, synthetic companionship, and finally, the enduring value of deeply human capacities in an increasingly technological world. Across all 4 seasons, one pattern continued to emerge. Educational technologies change very quickly. Human learning itself changes slowly. Again and again, new tools promise transformation. Some succeeded, some faded, some quietly reshaped education in ways only visible years later. But beneath every technological shift, the same fundamental questions persisted. How do humans develop understanding? What forms of struggle help learning deepen? And how should societies cultivate curiosity, judgment, and wisdom? What kinds of learning help people flourish within a changing world? Those questions remain unresolved because education itself is never fully finished. Each generation inherits tools, institutions, assumptions, and challenges from the generations before it, then slowly reshapes them again. And perhaps that is one of the most reassuring lessons hidden inside the history of educational technology. Humanity has navigated transformational tools before. The printing press transformed literacy. Industrialization shaped schooling. Computers changed research and communication, and the internet reorganized knowledge itself. Artificial intelligence now represents another extraordinary chapter in that ongoing story. And while moments of technological acceleration often generate understandable uncertainty, history also suggests something important. Humans remain remarkably adaptive learners. Educators adapt, students adapt, institutions adapt, and societies adapt. Not perfectly, not instantly, but continuously. Because education has always been larger than any individual technology. Education is ultimately about helping human beings make sense of the world around them, helping people participate thoughtfully in society, helping future generations inherit knowledge while still remaining capable of questioning it, and helping individuals develop both competence and perspective. All of those goals remain deeply human, perhaps even more human than ever. As intelligent systems increasingly generate information, the uniquely human dimensions of learning may become more visible rather than less. Curiosity, judgment, ethics, creativity, empathy, wisdom. These are not the outdated remnants of a pre-technological world. They may become some of the most important educational capacities of the future. And importantly, none of this diminishes the extraordinary potential of technology itself. Throughout the series, we've explored remarkable innovations that genuinely expand educational possibility. Greater accessibility, broader participation, more personalized support, and new tools for creativity and exploration. Technology can absolutely help people learn more effectively. It can open doors that once remained closed. It can support educators in very powerful ways. And it can help make education more inclusive and adaptable across the world. But technology alone does not determine the future of learning. People do. The confluence of educators, students, researchers, institutions, entire communities. The future of education will emerge through the interaction between human values and human tools. And perhaps this is the deepest curiosity we explore together across the cabinet. How will we choose to learn alongside machines that will become more intelligent? So for the final time, we'll close the cabinet. Thank you for exploring these artifacts, patterns, paradoxes, and signals from the evolving world of education. And thank you for spending time asking curious questions alongside me. Wherever education goes next, may we continue approaching it with thoughtfulness, humility, curiosity, and overall humanity. This has been the EdTech Curio Cabinet. Thank you for listening.